call on Minister Quinn to officially launch our programme.
Thank you very much, Fergus, and good afternoon and good evening to all of you here. When I got the invitation to come to this event, I was very keen to do so for the following reasons. As Minister for Education and Skills, when we come out of the difficulties that we still find ourselves in, the kind of economy in which we're going to have to relaunch this republic will be very different to the one in which we lost the run of ourselves collectively, and more individuals than others, so to speak. The reality now is, for the young people who are in our education system, is that the world that they're going to graduate into over the next number of years is going to be very, very different to the world in which I grew up in, and indeed many people in this room have grown up. 2 weeks ago I was in China, and prior to that we had, during the Irish presidency of the European Union, at the Education Ministers' Council in February, I invited 2 guest speakers to address the 27 Ministers for Education. One was Mr. Andreas Schleicher from the OECD. He's the person who runs the Education Standards Assessment, otherwise known as PISA. And the other was Lord David Putnam, who is very deeply involved in the application of technology to the classroom and to education. In the course of the discourse that was given by Andreas Schleicher, which we followed with a question and answer, he talked about the reality that's coming down, the facts that most Europeans don't really readily know. I certainly was hearing it for the first time. But there are 43 countries currently being assessed for educational standard achievements around the world. And they have now added to those 43 a couple of Chinese districts, including Shanghai, which, as many of you in this room will know, is a major international financial services centre and is continuing to grow. Andreas told us that by 2020, which is 7 years away, as close to us as 2006, there will be more educated, university in their 20s, educated Chinese alone, than there will be than the combined total of similarly qualified Europeans and Americans put together. We've never been here before. We've never confronted this kind of equal competition in terms of numbers, or greater competition in terms of numbers. And he wasn't referring, Andreas, to what's in Singapore, or what's in Mumbai, or in the other financial centres in that part of the world. And there's a reason for it, as you know, the transformation of the global landscape. 521 years ago, 2 events happened in the south of Spain. The Moors, the last remaining Moors who actually brought civilization to Christian Europe across the North African coast, effectively were driven out into what's now modern Morocco or beyond. And in the same year, 1492, Christopher Columbus discovered, quote unquote, the New World. But the reality of that has been for us, including Irish people, but Europeans and by extension North Americans and South Americans, is that in reality we got to dominate the globe for the last 500 years and to set the agenda. That now is changing. So my children and my grandchildren are going to have to earn their living in a world where the automatic assumed supremacy of Europe in every sense of the word can no longer prevail and will no longer prevail. And for us to earn a living, particularly to maintain the kind of lifestyle and prosperity and services that we require for all of us, we have to just be better and be smarter than we have been in the past. Now, in fact, we've been extremely smart in the international financial services sector. This was a coal dump where gas was made out of processing coal and selling off the coal. There's a tower around the corner, just on the right-hand side here, that was part and parcel of that process, less than 20 years ago. The corner of what is now Deacon's McCann Fitzgerald Road was in fact the great Dublin gasometer that was frequently characterised as being a pint of stout. And when the Dublin Docklands Authority was established, one of the objectives was to locate within it in International Financial Services Centre. When Jacques Santer became by accident the President of the European Commission back in the early 1990s, he was then the President or the Prime Minister of Luxembourg. He did a visiting tour of all of the then 15 capitals of the European Union. When he got to Dublin, he had a courtesy visit to the Taoiseach, and he spent most of his time down in what was then the Custom House Dock area, that small little 32-acre complex of offices. Because even at that stage, very early on, Dublin was racing ahead of some of the products that Luxembourg had traditionally thought that they had a monopoly on. And in a way, we've caught up with Luxembourg. You know this much better than I. But we now have on the horizon outside London and Luxembourg within Europe, and they're both more expensive venues for location for processing a lot of financial products. We now have globally places like Singapore, places like Shanghai, not to mention the East Coast of the United States and other parts of the world. And the business that you're in is a 24/7 global business. I don't have to tell you that, but we have to, as administrators and politicians and educators, have to recognize that just because we've gone home for the day, the business hasn't closed down, as many of you know. And therefore, the sort of people that we need to have equipped and trained and retrained are the kind of people that the SkillNets program and the Summit Finuas network is actually reaching out to deal with. Getting that message across is not easy, because people don't necessarily understand what it is you do and what the services are, and how they're not just for a small elite of people, but how they're actually servicing the financial needs of pretty much most Europeans in the developed, or most individuals in the developed world. The skills that are required can frequently have a shelf life of 5-10 years' time, or even less. So the continuity and the continual necessity to upskill and reskill and to learn again is increasingly going to become the norm for young people coming out of the education system, and for people in the early stages of their working environment. Now, many people in this room say, so what, it's always been like that. But institutionally, it has never been like that. Institutionally, you went to primary school, you got to secondary school. Increasingly, people went to third level. When I left school in 1964, only 10% of the cohort of young people that I was a part of actually went on to the 4 universities that were in this republic. 3 NUI colleges and Trinity. And the College of Surgeons was somewhere there as a medical school. 10%. Within less than 40 years, that is now up to 62%, the highest within the European Union. And people now take it for granted that that's where you will go, and that's where we want them to go. But we want them to get the sort of skills that will get what they want for themselves, which is a job. Parental aspiration for their children is, yes, to get a great education, but to get an education that will give them a ticket that will enable them to earn their living as they go through the various stages of their lives. And the institutions have yet, and I'm speaking about myself and about the Department of Education and the third level sector, have yet to realise that we need to learn and relearn. And you don't do that over 2.5 academic terms and take your holidays at the end of May and ramble back onto the college campus sometime in September, which is the culture for a lot of third level deliverers of education. And that's why the SkillNets program and working and learning and living is so important. We have to be able to manage blocks of time when people upskill and stay in contact with their workplace, or move from one part of the working environment of the company with whom they're employed to another part. These patterns of work and learning are completely alien to the world of education that I had the pleasure of addressing last week. The idea that you would actually combine those kinds of things and take it as normal is something that many people have yet to get their heads around. So the reason why I wanted to be with you here today and to listen to Susan talk about how State Street has been such an extraordinary success story is your message is not just of interest, as it clearly is, to people in this sector, and there are 32,000 people working in this sector, and you can multiply that by a factor of at least 2 to give the overall employment impact. That's probably more people than ever worked in their lives down in the Docklands area. when you think of it, over 60,000 people plus. It is an enormous number of people, and who in turn are being sustained by it. We need, in my view, to double, if not bring up to 100,000, the scale of the workforce in the financial services sector and the related sector that is providing support for it. Because they're the kind of things that we can do, they're the kind of things we can do very well, and the kind of things for which we can charge a reasonable price for our skill and our labour. Because we wouldn't be competitive with a lot of the other sectors that are emerging into the global landscape. So I'm looking forward to hearing Susan talk about State Street and how it has become another success story here in Ireland. We are continuing to attract that kind of investment. We're doing it fair and square, not because of the regime of 12.5% tax, not because of special grants and other things, but primarily because of the skills workforce. The Economist magazine, or the Economist Intelligence Unit to be more precise, found that Dublin scored the highest in the whole of Europe as a capital city for human capital, which is in a sense what you're talking about. But you don't stay top of the league forever, or for more than one season. You have to constantly keep on reinventing yourself and retraining to ensure that you maintain that position. And that's why I was pleased to get this invitation. I also wanted to see the hotel as well. But really, seriously, you have my full support. We will soon be enacting the legislation for SOLAS, which is the replacement body for what was FOS, but it won't be a replacement per se. It will be a new kind of authority for further education, which skill nets and related activities are an intrinsic part. It will be the HEA for further education. It will not deliver courses. It will not have centres of learning like FOS used to have. But it will in fact be coordinating and innovating and contracting in and hiring in the kinds of blocks of education that the 21st century labour force in the services sector in general and the financial services sector in particular actually requires. That legislation will be enacted this side of June, and the board will start work this side of June, and will work with the various providers, mostly in the private sector, but not necessarily in the private sector. The whole landscape of third level education is in itself going to be, and is being reorganised as we speak, so that we can move pretty quickly from saying there's a skills gap here, we need a course to fill it, we need at least 300, 400, 500 people who can do it. How can we get them into the system? What is the best fit between working and learning? Is it block release? Is it online education? A whole host of things that are now part and parcel of your normal lives, but which are aliens from space as far as the traditional educational providers regard it. And that's where SOLAS will coordinate what is happening in what will soon be 16 education and training boards, which will be commissioned by the middle of May, replacing the 33 vocational education commissions across the country. So we're gearing up for a transformation in education on the vocational applied working space, as well as the radical changes at fundamental level. But we need you as partners, and we need organisations like Skillet and the SOMAS Finuas network to actually make sure that the coming together of your needs and our ability in the education system to meet them actually gets the kind of fit, efficient fit that is required. And for that reason, I'm delighted to be here and delighted to have the opportunity to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed.